You're in big trouble. Black Waitress slips him a note that reveals the secret he never knew. What if a simple lunch at your usual diner could change everything you thought you knew about your past? Harold Peterson sat in his regular booth at Mabel's diner, the same red vinyl seat he'd claimed every Tuesday for the past 3 years since Martha passed. The morning sun streamed through windows that hadn't been cleaned in months, casting gentle shadows across his weathered hands as they wrapped around a coffee cup that had seen better days. He'd been coming here not for the food, which was passable at best, but for the quiet comfort of routine in a world that suddenly felt too big and empty. Today felt different though. The new waitress, a young black woman with kind eyes and a name tag reading, Denise, kept glancing his way with an expression he couldn't quite read. When she finally approached his table, her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her apron pocket. "Sir," she whispered, "I think you need to see this. Where are you watching from today?" Harold had always been a creature of habit. After 43 years working at the post office and 38 years married to Martha, predictability had become his anchor. Their little house on Maple Street, with its creaky front porch and Martha's prized rose garden, had been filled with the laughter of Sunday dinners and the gentle rhythm of a life well lived together. But when Martha's heart simply stopped one Tuesday morning while she was watering those roses, Harold found himself adrift in a silence that echoed through every room. The diner had become his lifeline. Not because he couldn't cook for himself, though his attempts at anything beyond scrambled eggs were questionable, but because the gentle hum of conversation and clinking dishes reminded him that the world still turned. The regulars nodded their hellos, the coffee was strong, and nobody asked him how he was doing with that pitying look he'd grown to dread. Denise had started working there just 2 weeks ago, replacing old Betty who'd finally retired after 30 years. Where Betty had been all business and efficient smiles, Denise moved through the diner with a different energy. She listened when the farmers complained about the drought, remembered how Mrs. Henderson liked her eggs, and had a laugh that reminded Harold of wind chimes on a summer evening. But lately, he'd noticed something else about Denise. The way she watched him sometimes, like she was working up the courage to say something important. How her eyes would linger on his face when she thought he wasn't looking. Today, that nervous energy had reached a peak. As she stood beside his table now, holding what looked like a folded piece of paper, Harold felt his chest tighten. In his experience, unexpected notes rarely brought good news. The last one had been from Martha's doctor, and it had changed everything. He wasn't sure his heart could handle another surprise. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Peterson," Denise said, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced around the diner to make sure they wouldn't be overheard. "But I found this in my grandmother's things after she passed last month. Your name is on it, and I think it might be important." Harold's hands shook as he unfolded the yellowed paper. The handwriting was faded but unmistakably familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. As his eyes focused on the words, his breath caught in his throat. It was a letter addressed to him, dated 42 years ago, from someone named Ruby Washington. The name hit him like a punch to the chest. Ruby. Sweet, laughing Ruby from the factory where he'd worked that summer before starting at the post office. The girl with the infectious smile who'd made those long, hot days bearable with her stories and her way of finding joy in the smallest things. They'd been friends, maybe something more if circumstances had been different, but that was 1981. And the world wasn't ready for what might have bloomed between a young white man and a young black woman in their small Pennsylvania town. "My grandmother was Ruby Washington," Denise said softly, watching the recognition dawn in Harold's eyes. "She always said there was a Harold she needed to find, but she never had your last name. Just Harold from the factory who was kind to her when others weren't." The letter trembled in Harold's hands as he read Ruby's careful script. She wrote about how much their friendship had meant to her, how his kindness had given her strength during some of her darkest days. But then came the words that stopped his world. "Harold, I need you to know that you have a daughter. Her name is Patricia, and she has your gentle eyes. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up." Harold felt the diner spinning around him as 42 years of what-ifs crashed down at once. Harold's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, the ceramic shattering against the linoleum floor in a crash that seemed to echo through his entire world. The few other diners turned to look, but Denise quickly waved them off, her own eyes filling with tears as she watched this stranger process the news that would change everything he thought he knew about his life. "I don't understand," Harold whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Ruby never. We never. I mean, we were friends, but I thought." He trailed off, memories flooding back with painful clarity. That last week at the factory, when Ruby had seemed distant, sad. How she'd avoided his eyes when he'd tried to talk to her. How she'd simply stopped showing up for work without a goodbye. Denise slid into the booth across from him, her professional demeanor forgotten in the face of this raw human moment. She was scared, "Mr. Peterson. Grandma Ruby told me about you many times over the years. She said you were the only white person at that factory who treated her like she mattered, who shared your lunch with her when hers was stolen, who stood up to those men when they said cruel things." Harold remembered those moments now with devastating clarity. Ruby's grateful smile when he'd offered half his sandwich. The way her face lit up when he'd defended her against the foreman's racist comments. How natural it had felt to care about her, to want to protect her from a world that seemed determined to crush her spirit. "She loved you, you know," Denise continued, her voice gentle but firm. "Not romantic love, maybe, but the kind of love that comes from recognizing goodness in another person. When she found out she was pregnant, she was terrified. This was 1981, Mr. Peterson. A young black woman with a baby and no husband? She couldn't even be sure the father was you, and she was too proud to ask for help." The words hit Harold like physical blows. All those years, while he'd been building a life with Martha, while they'd grieved their inability to have children, while he'd wondered whatever happened to his friend Ruby, there had been a daughter. His daughter. Growing up without knowing his name, without knowing that she had a father who would have moved heaven and earth to be part of her life. "Where is she now?" Harold asked, his voice barely audible. "Patricia, I mean. Is she?" Denise's expression grew complicated, a mixture of hope and hesitation crossing her features. "She's alive, Mr. Peterson. She's my aunt, actually. But she doesn't know about you. Grandma Ruby never told her your name. She only told me because she said if I ever found you, I should let you know you weren't forgotten. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments." Harold felt his world tilting on its axis, 42 years of lost time stretching between him and a daughter he'd never known existed. Harold sat in stunned silence for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The diner continued its usual rhythm around them, the sounds of conversation and clinking dishes now seeming to come from another world entirely. Finally, he looked up at Denise with eyes that held 4 decades of questions. "What do I do?" he asked simply. "How do you approach someone after 42 years and say, 'Hello, I'm your father'? How do you make up for a lifetime of missed birthdays, graduations, heartbreaks, and joys?" Denise reached across the table and gently covered his weathered hand with her younger one. "You start with the truth, Mr. Peterson. You start by being the same kind man my grandmother remembered. Patricia has had a good life, don't worry about that. She's a nurse at the county hospital, married to a wonderful man named David, and they have 2 teenage boys. But she's always wondered about her father. Grandma Ruby told her he was a good man, but that's all she knew." Harold felt a tear slide down his cheek as he imagined this woman, his daughter, going through life with only half her story. "She must hate me," he whispered. "Must think I abandoned them." "She doesn't hate anyone, Mr. Peterson. She's like you, I think. Kind. Patient. The type of person who believes there's usually a good reason when things don't go the way we expect." Denise pulled out her phone with a slight smile. "I have her number, if you'd like to call her. Or I could reach out first, let her know I found you." The moment felt surreal, like standing at the edge of a cliff with the choice to jump or step back. Harold thought about Martha, about how she'd always said that the best gifts in life often came wrapped in the most unexpected packages. She would have loved meeting Patricia, would have embraced her instantly as the daughter they'd never been able to have. "Call her," Harold said, his voice stronger now. "Tell her I'd like to meet her, if she's willing." Tell her I'm sorry it took so long. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. As Denise dialed the number, Harold realized that sometimes the most important chapters of our lives begin when we think the story is almost over. Part 6, Heartfelt Conclusion and Farewell, 300 to 400 words. 3 days later, Harold sat in the same booth at Mabel's diner, but everything had changed. Across from him sat Patricia, a woman in her early 40s with his same green eyes and Ruby's warm smile. Her husband David had offered to come along for support, but Patricia had insisted on meeting her father alone first. Some moments, she'd said, needed to happen without witnesses. The initial awkwardness had melted away faster than Harold had dared hope. Patricia had Ruby's gift for putting people at ease, and when she'd first walked into the diner and seen him sitting there, she'd simply smiled and said, "I can see why Mama Ruby spoke so fondly of you. You have kind eyes." They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Harold learned about Patricia's work as a pediatric nurse, about his grandsons who were more interested in video games than fishing but who might be convinced to try both. Patricia learned about her father's quiet life, about Martha who would have adored her, about the vegetable garden he still tended even though he was the only one left to eat from it. "I'm not angry," Patricia had assured him when he'd tried to apologize for the 42nd time. Mama Ruby made her choice based on love and fear and the times she lived in. You can't fault anyone for doing their best with what they knew then. What matters is what we do now. As they prepared to leave the diner, Patricia hugged him with the fierce intensity of someone making up for lost time. "Sunday dinner," she declared. 2 o'clock. The boys are dying to meet their grandfather, and David makes a mean pot roast. Harold nodded, feeling lighter than he had in years. Ruby had been right about one thing in her letter, he thought as he watched his daughter drive away. Sometimes the most important friendships plant seeds that bloom decades later in the most unexpected ways. Denise, who had been watching from behind the counter, brought him a fresh cup of coffee. "Looks like you'll be needing that regular booth for family dinners now," she said with a grin. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we least expect them, and the kindness we show others creates ripples that reach far beyond what we can imagine.